Buenas. Good day, everyone. It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining Getting Your Edge, How to Downsize Your Life. I'm your co-host, Dennis Day, and I'm here with Judy Gratton, our other co-hosts. Good day, Judy. And our special guest today is Ashley Werter. She's a former Northwest and has moved to Mexico, Puerto Vallarta specifically. And she's here to talk about two things. One, what it's like to live in Mexico as an expat American, but also to own a business and run that business in Mexico, the differences and so forth. Little background. Ashley is a professional photographer. She ran classes at Kenmore Camera, where I lived real close, and I took some of her classes. She started a Facebook group, which I have continued to maintain for now 6 years. I can't believe it's been that long. And she got up and took off. And while we were disappointed, we were excited for her adventure. So Ashley, tell us a little bit about what you've done to leave the Northwest and move to Puerto Vallarta.
We were living in Seattle and I was just like working all the time. And my son was really young at the time. And I just felt like I didn't spend as much time with him as I would have liked as having my first young child. And so I was just starting to think about what I could do differently with my life. And I have this aunt who came to Mexico in the 70s for a semester abroad, and she just fell in love with it. And my whole life, the last 30, 40 years, she's been coming to Mexico every year almost. And she just always was coming back and saying, go to Mexico, it's the best place on earth. And so I just thought maybe she's right. So I came down for a few days to check it out, see what it was like. I had never been to Mexico before. So I came to Puerto Vallarta for 4 days. I spent 3 days in San Pancho and just getting massages on the beach and eating lots of fresh shrimp. And I took a food tour in Puerto Vallarta. And I just, at the end of the tour, was like, man, that was great. We went around the city. We saw 8 or 10 different places and learned all about it. And I just thought I could do this with photography. So I decided to pick up and move. So I started with my workshops. That's what was my main goal when I moved here. And since then, I've transitioned more into the weddings and portraits side because it's just, there's a lot more of a customer base. But I still enjoy doing both. I volunteer every week at the Vallarta School for Girls, and I teach them photography classes also. We have little exhibitions, but I'm keeping myself busy.
How exciting.
Did you speak Spanish before you traveled there?
I did take Spanish in high school. I took 2 years of required Spanish, and I lived in California right after high school, but I didn't really use much Spanish there and I lost it. So when I moved here, I just remember Senora Zamora taught me how to say to want, to have, and to need. And she said, if you can conjugate these 3 verbs and know a little vocab, you'll do pretty good. And she was right. But I think a lot of it came back to me and I try to practice it every day.
Do you find that you speak Spanish more often than English now, or?
Most of my customers are still English speakers. I have a lot of customers from California, Texas, Canada. So in my daily life, I definitely still speak more English than I do Spanish. But every time I leave the house, I'm going to be speaking some Spanish for sure.
So are the majority of your clients then from these other countries, or do you also work within the people who actually are from Mexico?
Yeah, I do both. A lot of my clients for weddings especially are destination weddings. And so they're coming from California or something where it's just far more expensive to have a wedding. And a lot of my students as well, I would say, are from Canada and the United States. But I do have plenty of local clients, and it's a really international city. So there are people here from the US, Canada, Argentina, Germany. There's a lot of diversity in Puerto Vallarta.
Wow. So how does the cost of living compare? I chuckle about that with what it was like when you lived in the United States.
It's been 6.5 years. So I don't know what your guys' current living prices are. I know that every time I go back to visit, a little bit more expensive each time.
Yes.
But I left in 2018 and I was renting an apartment in Seattle. It was about $2,100 a month and with a parking space. And it was only like 850 square feet. Living in Mexico, I have a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom house and I pay $850.
Oh my goodness. So I would guess that's allowed you to improve your lifestyle and that of your son with.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely my money goes a lot farther than it did in the US. And I can have the ability to not work sometimes if I want a vacation with my son or take a week off. If he has time off, I don't feel as pressured to make.
How old is your son now?
I just turned 8.
And so is he going to local schools, a private school, or?
As foreigners, he's not allowed to go to a public school here. He has to go to a private school. It's in a private school. It's a Montessori school. It's actually about 50 feet from my house.
Oh, wow.
So that's excellent. And it's a bilingual school. So half of his classes are in Spanish and half are in English. And it's just I love the school. His teachers are really kind and dedicated, and they have so many celebrations and great activities. I'm happy with him there.
Wonderful. How did the homes compare to homes in the United States in terms of size, amenities, I think affordability you just showed us. But in general, if someone wanted to either buy a home or rent a home, what differences would they see coming from the United States?
This is one of the fastest growing cities in Latin America. So we are getting a lot of like new builds, and those look a lot like your United States, like very nicely finished apartments and condos, pools, gyms, all that kind of thing. So there's plenty of those options. But if you're going for a more local area or just a build in general, there are certainly some differences. The infrastructure in Mexico is very different. So pretty much we all have like cisterns on our roof for water. We don't have gas lines. So they either deliver it in the tank on the roof or like in a cylinder. We definitely have some more architectural things that are different. Sometimes the windows don't close all the way, or it's an open window with just an iron gate, something like that. Not every kitchen has a cabinet. Sometimes it's just going to be a bare counter and there might be shelves or something, but there's definitely going to be some differences. Maybe the power went out today, or I don't have very good internet, or the water's running low or something. There's some adjustments to make with that.
So but the water, is it water that you can drink that is stored up there, or do you have to?
It depends. In the newer builds, the cisterns are really impeccable, and a lot of those people do drink the water because it's not really our water that's the problem. It's the delivery systems, right? So some people do drink their water. But no, I use a water delivery service and I get 3 of those big garrafones of water for about 100 pesos, which is about $5. It lasts me for about 10 days of cooking and drinking my water. But for showering, brushing your teeth, the tap water is fine. I have an electronic water heater, but there are definitely lots of like Mexican fixes. There's going to be a lot of jerry rigging things, or it just is what it is. Some of those things just aren't so important culturally. If you don't have air conditioning, you most definitely have a ceiling fan or open windows. There's a lot of turret buildings or some sort of part of the building that was made so that the hot air can be stored up there and keep the rest of it cool.
Wow.
It's a lot of concrete and brick, and it's just a little bit different than the houses in the US where it's like wood and drywall and things like that. But we do have both options for sure.
Okay. But you have to be flexible, would you say?
You should definitely come with an open mind and know that just like the infrastructure is different and the attitude on fixing it is pretty laid back.
Moving to any country, that you have to come with an open mind. Things are just.
Yeah.
I notice we watch a lot of British TV and I'm always amazed. We have this giant refrigerator and nobody has giant refrigerators. They have much smaller refrigerators even in the TV shows. So flexibility would probably be like it almost a requirement if you want to make a move to
Oh, yeah.
Mexico, would you say? Okay.
Ashley, let's talk about some cultural differences of living in a foreign country and living in Mexico specifically. What did you notice when you first moved there that was different culturally versus the United States?
First of all, the people are so just like naturally kind and welcoming and really hospitable. And it was like just surprising being a foreigner and just being like so welcome immediately. And I think that's like a big misconception. One of my trips outside of Mexico since I've been here, I went to New Orleans and the Uber driver was like shocked when he heard me say that the Mexican people were so nice, but they really genuinely are. And there's just so much celebrations in Mexico. There's all types of holidays and there's always parades and just like culturally, it's very rich and in lots of color and celebrations. There's all dancers and it's just been a really fun experience. And just little things like I feel like in the United States, our idea of mariachi is like one person singing, and when you see mariachis in like film or cartoons, it's one drunk guy singing La Cucaracha, right? But mariachis came from the state that I live in now here in Mexico, and that's where they originated. And it's so beautiful and there's usually 10 or 12 of them. They have just immaculate outfits and they play the most beautiful music. And it's just so different than what I expected it to be. And it's really such an art form. And I feel like that's just how everything has been moving to Mexico. The Day of the Dead is just like a week-long celebration with so many flowers and ofrendas and just everyone celebrating. And they're just like a really festive culture.
Now, have you come across Americans who are saying, yeah, but we can't get anything done because they're always celebrating?
Yeah, there's definitely some grouches that I hear. I actually find, and I thought this was funny because growing up in the United States, people would always say, oh, if you're going to travel, tell people that you're Canadian because they like Canadians more. Canadians are nicer, right? When in Mexican culture, they start at 10 p.m. and they'll finish at 7 a.m. and there will be serenading and loud music and you'll probably still see that person at work the next day. And it is what it is. But there are definitely a lot of people who complain about the noise because it's a very loud culture. And it's upsetting to see because it's just, I feel if you're going to move here or if you came here for the experience that is that really laid back, loving lifestyle, like one of my favorite things seeing when I moved here was that I could go into the pharmacy and my pharmacist has a baby on her hip and she's going to be that way all day and her family is her priority and they allow that to happen. And that's not really something you would get to see in the United States. And we move here for those certain things. And then we complain about the things that we lost. And there has to be a trade, a balance. And especially when it's something that's not malicious, like they don't play loud music just to keep you up all night. They're celebrating life with their family or whatever. And it's sad to see people get upset about things like that.
Yeah. Well, mentioning healthcare and pharmacies, that like for you, how do you get healthcare?
Well, there's lots of private healthcare that you can get. So I just have a private healthcare plan. And that's a big thing in Mexico is there's pharmacies on every corner and everywhere you can imagine. So the prices of medicine are less, the availability is more. And some of the most surprising things moving here were going into the doctor's office because the doctor's office is usually in the States. You walk in, there's a waiting room, you wait in the waiting room, you wait in the doctor's office. A few people come in and ask you questions, and then you get to see the doctor and you have a few minutes with them, and then they send you to the lab and whatever. But in Mexico, once you get past the waiting room, you're in the doctor's office. They have their exam room side of the office and their desk side of the office. And they might have an assistant in there, but they're there with you the whole time. They do the whole exam and answer all your questions. And it's just, you can expect to leave having paid $30 and whether it's your dentist or general doctor, but it's very surprising how good the healthcare is. Yeah.
Wow.
That's great.
How do you get around? Do you have a car or
I did have a car for a while. I don't right now. So I just use Uber and it's between $3 or $12 a ride, depending on how far I'm going. It's usually very affordable. And the bus system is really great. And it costs 10 pesos, which is about 50 cents. And you can get pretty much all over the city like that. And yeah, it's very accessible place.
Can I get practicality? In order to reside in Mexico, did you have to have a specific kind of visa, or can you just move down there?
Those rules are always changing. So definitely you got to check with what the current requirements are. But there are some options for if you were to move into Mexico, if you wanted permanent residency, there's requirements that you have to fulfill. You have to make a certain amount of money or have a certain amount of money.
Mhm.
And for a temporary resident, it's the same thing. When I went into that office the first time and said I wanted to move to Mexico back in Seattle, and they were asking me, oh, who do you know in Mexico? What are you going to do there? I was just like so used to moving to different places. I was like, oh, I'm just going to go there and make it work. They, I think, were a little bit doubtful that's how it was going to go and that I maybe wasn't so serious about it because they do want to see that you want to live and succeed in Mexico and not just come here and either bail or not contribute to what they're doing. But you do have options to be a tourist in Mexico for 100 days, that's 6 months, and then you can go and come back. But again, with the new administration, those are changing and you should look into those requirements. But me personally, I came as a temporary resident. I got 1 year as a temporary resident. And then when that ended, I got to reapply for a 3-year temporary resident. And then at the end of the 3 years, I qualified to be a permanent resident. So I applied to be a permanent resident. And now that's what I am. I'm a permanent resident. I, at 5 years, was eligible to apply for citizenship, but that comes with a whole bunch of tests. And I need to get a little bit better at my Spanish before I try to perfect that one. But each stage comes with a process and some fines and some charges, but it's definitely doable.
So when you were preparing for this in Seattle, were you speaking with the U.S. consulate or were you speaking with the Mexican consulate in Seattle?
We went to the U.S. consulate in Seattle. I will say that the Boise one was far faster. So you might want to check what your options are because Seattle had like month-long waits. We canceled our appointment or something. There are options.
What about social life? What do you do for fun?
Vallarta is a really social city. There's always something going on here. Facebook is a huge way to get to do anything in Mexico. Facebook and WhatsApp are like our main things. Most people won't have a website, but they'll have the Facebook and there's groups for everything. And especially for cats or people who want to get to know new people and socialize. Mm-hmm. So there's always groups for karaoke or reading clubs or an adventure group, or there's always events going on and something to do. So there's lots of live music and dancing. And it's being like a beach city, it's also very active. There's lots of adventure. We have rainforests, there's hikes and waterfalls to go to. We have tons of beautiful beaches and working out is a huge thing. I train Muay Thai, so I do a lot of that. But there's really something for every time. It's like kickboxing.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Cool.
Yeah.
Are you interacting mostly with expats or is it a mixture of both?
I would say a mixture of both. There are definitely a lot of expats who come here or move here and stick with mostly English speaking groups and friends. But I would say mine is about 50-50. My Spanish allows me to be able to communicate with both. Yeah, I have like a lot of activities that I do. Like my Muay Thai, for example, is they're all Mexicans in there. And so I have a lot of friends from that activity that only speak Spanish. But then there's lots of friends who come here and have businesses also. So like I have some friends who own a bar. So we do lots of events and things there. So it's definitely a mix.
Thinking about downsizing but don't know where to start? The Edge Group team has you covered. With over 30 years of real estate experience, we are Puget Sound's downsizing experts. We will smoothly guide you into a home that fits your next chapter. From estate sales to painters to movers, We have a trusted network of vetted vendors to handle every detail. Whether you're buying, selling, or just exploring your options, we will help make your next adventure low stress and seamless. Ready to right-size your home and life? Call the Edge Group team today. You can find us at edgegroupteam.com. Thank you.
Are there any, what do I want to call it? Does the United States, do they reach out to you? Do they have any requirements from you as someone living in another country?
No, not really. I really don't have any contact with that kind of thing at all. And
do you pay into
what's that?
Social Security or do pay taxes or anything like that to the United States?
I pay Mexican taxes. My business operates in Mexico, so I pay Mexican taxes. And if I do make US money, I file for those taxes, but primarily it's just Mexican taxes. We file every other month. There's a lot of options for entrepreneurs in Mexico because it is such a culture of nobody just asks you for money. There's very few people who are just like asking for change for no reason. They'll get on the bus and sing and maybe people give them change, or they will sell candies, or they'll open doors, or, everybody's really like hardworking and really willing to work for their money. And there are so many people that have a cart and sell churros on the street or have any type of business buying Costco pies and selling them at markets. Like really, they're just very entrepreneurial and their system allows them to be that way. And the regime that I am in as a small business owner was like the first year I paid 10% of what I should have paid in taxes. And then each year it increases 10% until 10 years in. And then I'm finally just like paying normal taxes. But I feel like that really was a supportive move and is like wanting their people to succeed and be able to profit and have a good business. And I really appreciated that.
Good way to grow a small business.
What would you say has been the most challenging thing for you about making the move? What was the biggest how to climb over?
There was definitely a lot of confusing situations when we first moved here. It was, how do we buy the gallons of water? Because the people were telling us, oh, we can only sell you the water, not the bottle, or just silly little things like that. And it was just trying to figure out how to work in all of their systems and how they do things. And definitely learning the language. As a foreigner, I very often look like a tourist when I get into an Uber or something. Or if I'm walking the Malecón, like I look like a tourist and everybody speaks to me as if I am one. And then if I can converse back with them, it's always surprised. Like, oh, your Spanish is so good. And I'm like, it's not really that good. But compared to all the tourists who come and don't speak English, they're always just as Senora Zamora in high school promised me that they would be. They are always extremely grateful that I have learned some language and can converse with them, because typically the exchange would be, oh, I don't speak English. You have to speak Spanish. And then you speak Spanish and they realize how terrible your Spanish is. And suddenly they speak English because they're like, oh, I don't speak very good English, but then their English is way better than your Spanish. So they just help you out. But there's a lot of English speaking Mexicans. And I feel like it's definitely survivable if you don't learn the language. But I feel like the gesture of learning some and just how helpful that is, it goes a long way.
I've noticed that I've traveled in other places where I don't speak the language, and just trying, people appreciate it. Right. They do.
Mexicans talk a lot with their hands also, so that it's a little easier to get points across because they're very demonstrative already.
And what are some of the things that you've just thoroughly enjoyed about raising your son in Mexico versus the U.S.?
When it comes to kids, and I hate to be a downer topic, but just the reassurance that when he's at school, he's safe means a lot to me. That's a huge, I always get so sad when I see or hear about my family or people in the US that have to go through certain types of drills at school to be prepared for disasters that are not earthquakes and things like that. Like my son has earthquake drills, but he doesn't have to do lockdown, hide from an active shooter drills, because that's just not something that happens in Mexico. A lot of people, when I said I wanted to move to Mexico, told me hideous things. Oh, your child's going to be abducted or molested, or you're going to get shot, or the cartel. And certainly there are cartel problems, but as a person living in Seattle, you don't really worry about the crimes happening in Chicago, right? And in Seattle, I had a lot more run-ins with crime than I do here in Mexico. It's mostly just petty theft. Like if you leave your wallet, you might not see it again, kind of things. But definitely my number one is just knowing that when I take my son to school, he's going to be safe there. And then just honestly, just the people that I've met and being able to do what I love and be really accepted by my community. I try to be really active in it. I volunteer and I am involved in my son's school and I do a lot of events around town. And it's just so nice to be so welcomed.
Sounds fabulous to me.
Is there anything you really miss about the United States?
My family, certainly. My family all lives in Washington with a few cousins scattered about. It's definitely the people, but there are a lot of conveniences. Like, oh man, I miss bathtubs. We don't have bathtubs. It's extremely rare.
I love that.
Bathtub now. There's little things like that I miss. And those are also the little things that when my son visits the US, carpeting everywhere and nice light switches and drinking fountains. Those are all things that make him go, wow, oh my God, this place is amazing. And there are little comforts like that I miss for sure. In like newer hotels or condos, you might get a bathtub. We have like outdoor bathtubs. A lot of people do like ice baths here, but it's like not plastic, but like a plastic-ish way to be in your house, a porcelain bathtub, unless you have a new build and you put that in your request because it's just not a thing that they do. But the things that I gained versus what I lost, it was definitely worth it.
Let me ask you, are you renting now?
I do. I rent.
So let's ask, would there ever be the opportunity for you to buy a home in Mexico?
There's definitely lots of affordable homes in Mexico for people of all different price ranges. And then there's just like I'm not familiar with all of them, but there are some requirements like foreigners can't own property within a certain distance from the ocean. They don't want oceanfront property to go to foreigners. But that when it comes to if you're going to build an entire condo building, I'm sure that would be a little different. But there's little rules like that. And there's definitely some processes to go through, but it's definitely options to buy Mexico. Absolutely.
Now, you live in a tourist, a tourist venue, a city that's based on tourism. Do you feel like this is more expensive than other parts of Mexico? Have you traveled to maybe some places?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, my area is still pretty affordable. It definitely has been going up every year because it is growing so fast. We're getting a new cruise ship dock. We're getting a new airport dock. We're getting condos popping up all over the place. It's really a growing city. But in other places in Mexico, it's absolutely much cheaper. There's some mountain towns a few hours from here. I just went there for my son's birthday and we spent the weekend there. And even just a little thing like the convenience store, we bought for the three of us some snacks and some drinks. And what I ended up paying, I was like, wow, that would have got me one snack in Vallarta, but here I paid for the whole thing for 40 pesos. But definitely there are all types of price ranges.
So if you could go back in time to 2018, what would you tell yourself about moving to Mexico that would be helpful to those of us who are not there, but are considering moving to Mexico?
For me personally, I would say to have a little bit of patience because there's a saying in Mexico that doesn't necessarily mean tomorrow, but it means not today. Now it's something to get used to because I'm very entrepreneurial and I'm always doing something and I'm like ready to get it done now. And I had to curb that a little bit. So my washing machine needs repaired and I've been waiting for 4 tomorrows and it is what it is. To understand that the flexibility of those people didn't follow through on their commitments because they prioritized something else, like their family or whatever it was. And that I also had that ability and that I could not be so structured and tight into my routines and my ways. And then I can okay, I don't have to get this all done today. We can take our time. Like it is what it is. And,
your stress level to look at life that way.
I'm still always hustling. I have to make all of my own work. I have to tell people when they need to hire me. But as far as pace of life, absolutely. It's nice to be like, yeah, you know what? I can take off the evening and go watch the sunset on the beach. And it doesn't matter if I'm 20 minutes late. They're not going to start yet anyways, because I have spent a lot of time showing up early, which to me is on time. And then it starts 2 hours later and it's just more laid back. And so it will force you to be more laid back also.
How about financial things like banking or anything along those lines that you have any information on or would think that?
I'm not sure how it would work for a tourist to have a bank account, but as a temporary and permanent resident, I was able to make a bank account for myself easily. I have my Mexican bank accounts that I use for debit cards and daily uses and paying people I work with or whatever it is. And then I have my US bank accounts and I just use Wise. I use TransferWise to pay myself money and I can do it in minutes. You want to be a little tech savvy on that aspect when you come down here, because I did just see somebody post in one of the groups that as usual, they did a wire transfer and this time the money didn't show up and they never had a problem with that before and were asking for advice. And I don't have to do any of that. I can transfer money to myself at any point, no matter where I am. It's Wise. But there are lots of options. There's probably 10 different financial apps like that where you can transfer money, but it's extremely helpful. And I definitely would recommend being up to date on that, because there are mistakes and different systems. Then it just...
I know my brother had real issues getting money from the States, and I think it was being wired. I don't think he was looking at apps, the idea of using apps, putting it in an American account and then using an app to transfer it into his Mexican account.
It saves a lot of time and stress.
Okay. The United States has really become almost a cashless society. If people ask me for money on the street, I don't have cash in my pocket anymore. How is it? Is it a cashless society in Mexico, or is it still a mix of both?
It's definitely not a cashless society. There are plenty of places that don't accept credit cards and you can only pay in cash. Even you're like, oh, this is a big popular restaurant. Why don't you take cards? And I'm going to just assume that has some tax reasons, but you definitely want to be able to have pesos here. You can spend dollars, but you're not going to get a good conversion rate if you do spend dollars. I get paid in dollars quite often from clients, and I usually just spend that at Costco, honestly, because they have a really good conversion rate. So if I just save my dollars, I'll spend them at Costco, and that works for me. Office Depot also has a really good one. But for the most part, they're going to give you several dollars less for the exchange rate than normal.
Even if you go to an exchange, a bank or something?
You can go to a bank to do it as just like a foreigner without an account, definitely. But the exchange rate is not going to be the official exchange rate, because they're always going to... A lot of people will always ask, should I bring dollars or pesos? You should definitely bring pesos, and you should have the ability to get pesos while you're here. But the ATMs will take your US cards and give you pesos. You just have to make sure you choose the right option and you're picking 1,000 pesos and not $1,000 kind of thing, but because that's a big difference.
Ashley, this has been a wealth of information for somebody who's contemplating, even as a tourist. I would think you're going to spend an extended time. We really appreciate you coming on. Have you got any final words for anybody who's considering coming to Mexico for an extended or long-term stay?
Yeah, I would just say have an open mind, learn a few phrases in Spanish, and have a good time, because we have so much to offer in Mexico. The people and the food and the culture and the beaches and the mountains. It's really, you can't not have a good time, but you should also just not expect it to be the same as the United States. And then it's going to be great.
Thank you so much. Really
Yeah, thank you.
appreciate this. We're going to do part 2 about running a business in Mexico, which is very different than just living there off, say, Social Security or something. And we really want to find that information. So that'll be our next podcast, is running a business in Mexico as a foreigner. Thanks for attending. We wish you the best. And thanks for watching Getting Your Edge, how to downsize your home and life. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.